Leaders' questions. Colin, Deputy Barry Gowan.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We listened carefully yesterday to your comments on the economy. You spoke, for example, about there having to be a new perspective and a lot of honesty, that we should rid ourselves of the politics of denial and anger, areas you championed this side of the House, no doubt. But you continue to outline to the Dáil and to the people that the mortgage issue and unemployment is being tackled with actions that this government is taking. And despite these actions, unemployment is rising, and we heard from the Central Bank last week that the mortgage issue was not being dealt with. And if you truly believe that these areas are being tackled, your speech had some major inferences about politics of denial, and you're far more out of touch than we give you credit for. I welcome the fact, and we all welcome the fact, that you seem to have converted to the politics of honesty rather than the politics of denial and anger. And I'm sure many of your colleagues, such as Deputies Shortall and Penrose, Brewin, Nulty and Naughton even, welcome that too. Taoiseach, people, as you know and you should know, but you don't seem to give the impression that you know, people are under ferocious pressure. ESB prices are up.
Thank you.
Petrol is up. Hold on a second. Gas is up. Health insurance is up. And even those who have jobs are finding it extremely difficult to make ends meet. Businesses do not have access to finance, whether you believe it or not. But what I want to get to, despite the fact about medical cards and carers allowance being so long waiting for results, is the EU fully aware, or are your counterparts fully aware of what the Irish people are actually going through? Some ministers, for example, are saying that Ireland's debt is unsustainable.
We're over time.
Do you believe this to be the case? Or do you believe that being on Time magazine and accepting awards is more important than you and telling your counterparts and telling the EU the real truth about what is actually happening in the Irish economy?
Thank you.
The real truth is that the people of this country are suffering very badly for the consequences of what your party did in government prior to you being booted out of office at the beginning of 2011. You have some neck. You have some neck to come in here and ask about what the EU thinks or what they did. You tied us, your government tied us hand and foot in an agreement that you made with the EU and the IMF at the end of 2010. And this government was left with the task of having to unravel that, to renegotiate it, to get a better deal for the Irish taxpayer and for the Irish people. And we are proceeding to do that. And we're proceeding at a number of levels. First of all, on the terms of the agreement itself, which has been the subject of renegotiation by the government and is continuing to be in order to get a deal for the Irish taxpayer that lifts the burden of bank debt, which your government, your people, tied us hand and foot to, tied this state and tied the Irish taxpayer to the fortunes of the banks in 2008 and repeated it and consolidated in 2010. We have to unwind that now, and we will do it. Secondly, we have to proceed as a country to create jobs, to attract investment, which is what we're doing. Since this government was formed, 17,000 additional jobs in the private sector, as against the huge job losses that we had seen over the previous time. And on mortgages, and yes, people are suffering as a consequence of mortgages and negative equity and all that goes with that. This is the first government that has decided that we will tackle the issue of mortgages, that we will put in place new legislation on personal insolvency, which is now almost at a completion stage, which will provide the person who has the loan and the mortgage with a greater degree of strength when they're negotiating with their bank.
Thank you. Deputy Cowan, 1 minute, thank you.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Let's be honest about this. The reality is
sorry. The deputy only has
The
1 minute.
reality is
he's entitled to 1 minute.
the economy is flat, and even the Irish CEOs this morning cannot predict growth until late 2014. And we welcome any job announcements, especially the one this morning in Louth. Of course we do. But overall, you have to look at the unemployment figures, and you can see that they are rising, despite emigration being severely high. So I go back to the nub of the question again. Can you, with a degree, as you said yourself, of perspective and honesty, in the absence of denial or anger, tell us when and not how, the moral and economic benefit of retrospective capitalisation will accrue to us, the Irish people, whom effectively, as the Taoiseach eventually agreed on Monday, saved the euro by virtue of recapitalisation at the people's expense. And in doing that, he rubbished the commitment that you gave to the Irish people and subsequently got a mandate on by virtue of the fact that you would burn bondholders. And I would say it was almost treasonous to give the Irish people that impression. But let you live by that commitment. Let you live by that commitment. And let you now answer the question as to when, not how, when the Irish people will get what's due to them.
Thank you.
The Irish people will get this deal when we are satisfied that we have the best deal available for the Irish taxpayer. And let me assure you that we will get the best deal for the Irish taxpayer. We are obliged to get it, and we're obliged to get it financially, and we're obliged to get it politically, and we're obliged to get it because of the incredible mess and hames that the previous government made of this. You did what? You tied the fortunes of the taxpayer to the banks. You gave them a blanket guarantee, and you then tied the Irish taxpayer. You then tied the Irish taxpayer hand and foot to a deal with the EU and the IMF, which we now have to unwind. Let me assure you of this. We will solve the mess that your government created, and we will get the best possible deal for the Irish taxpayer.
Thank you. Deputy MacDonald. Without interruption, please. Thank you.
Gurmai, good account, Corla. Well, Tánaiste, the Troika will conclude their review of the bailout programme, so-called, today. And I've no doubt that they will give us a collective pat on the back and congratulate government for meeting its cutback targets. They think you're doing a great job because you're keeping them happy. But of course, back at the ranch, things are very, very different for citizens, particularly Tánaiste citizens who rely on our health services. Sinn Féin has no confidence in Minister James Riley. He presides after disaster within the health service. And indeed, I note that you seem to have very little confidence in the Minister yourself. Only that lack of confidence can explain your decision to keep an eye over his shoulder in respect of the location of the Children's Hospital. I think that's a wise move on your part. But could I suggest to you this morning that you might open up investigations on a couple of other fronts? You might have a look, for instance, and see how people are supposed to manage on home help allocations of 30 minutes a week. You might have a look at the case of Jennifer Banks, a Galway woman, a sufferer of multiple sclerosis, who can't get the medication she needs to deal with chronic pain. You might also explain why the Minister continues the illegal operation of the Mobility Allowance Scheme. And you might also, Tánaiste, usefully ask the Minister to explain why it was he was meeting with NAMA on the 20th of April last to discuss primary health care centres in Balbriggan, a meeting that took place that he was personally in attendance at months in advance of his doctoring of the list of primary health care centres to be built.
I think we're very, very careful now using that sort of language, doctoring. Thank you.
I stand by my language, Count.
You don't make allegations.
Two questions for you. What are you going to do about the Mobility Allowance Scheme and the fact that the state is operating outside of the law? And secondly, what about this meeting that James Riley had with NAMA on the 20th of April? He's made this clear in an answer to parliamentary questions. He discussed at that meeting Balbriggan, primary healthcare centres, and we know subsequently that the list of centres to be built was changed, and indeed Balbriggan was included.
Tánaiste.
Well, there's quite a lot in the question that has been asked by Deputy MacDonald, and I'll deal with them as in the series in which they were addressed to me. First of all, in relation to the issue of the Children's Hospital, this government is going to proceed with the building of a children's hospital. We've had talk in this country for as long as I can remember about the building of a children's hospital. We're going ahead and we're going to build a children's hospital. The original site which was identified for the children's hospital, as you know, Bord Planola struck down the planning application for that, and the government appointed a group to look at the options that were available to government following that. We will be considering the report from that group in the very near future, and I know that the Taoiseach gave an indicative time frame for that when he addressed the issue here during the week. But I think that the people of this country need to be assured that this government is going to proceed with the building of a children's hospital, and we have identified the source of the funding for that. And I think that that will be of enormous benefit to the people of the country, and particularly to the children of the country. With regard to the issue of the mobility allowance, the Ombudsman has made a report on that, and she has recommended that the upper age limit of 66 years as a condition of the mobility allowance scheme should be removed with immediate effect. She has recommended that the HSE should reconsider the applications of the 4 complainants in the report about taking account of the upper age limit, and that the HSE should reconsider the applications received since the 1st of April 2011, which were refused solely on the basis of the upper age limit without regard to the upper age limit. This matter requires further consideration by the government in order to meet the requirements of the Equal Status Acts and to ensure that there is no hardship for those currently in receipt of the mobility allowance. We are seeking further legal advice as to the options available to the government. It is not the government's wish to withdraw the mobility allowance from those who currently receive it. The government will be seeking legal advice as to how we can proceed in a way that is reasonable, sustainable, and does not cause undue distress to those in receipt of the allowance. The Ombudsman found in an investigation which she conducted that the mobility allowance is not in compliance with the Equal Status Act with regard to the upper age limit of 66, and she recommended that the mobility allowance be reviewed and brought into compliance with the Equal Status Act. And she also raised the issue further in her 2011 annual report. The mobility allowance was established in 1979 by way of departmental circular. There have been 2 further circulars in 2002 and 2007, but the basic criteria for the allowance remains: the person must be unable to walk or be in such a condition that the exertion required to walk would be dangerous to their health. The mobility allowance is payable by the Health Service Executive, subject to a means test to persons with a severe disability.
Thank you.
Sorry, Count Gordon.
It's okay.
Have I run out of time? Yeah.
Sorry? If you wish to finish the point.
Sorry, yes. No, sorry, I thought you were discontinuing.
No, I'm just sort of
the allowance, as I said, is designed to help eligible people who are... Well, I'm replying to you. It's the question. Deputy MacDonald, you asked about the mobility allowance. You know, and I'm serious about it.
You're running down the clock.
This is what is of interest. There's a report. There's a report from the Ombudsman, the government respects the Ombudsman and the office of the Ombudsman, and I expect, and I think it's perfectly reasonable that you do ask the question here this morning about the mobility allowance, and there are many people I think who want to know what way we are dealing with this, and I'm explaining that to you, which I think is of interest, to the public. There are currently the amount of the allowance is €208.50 per month. There are in excess of 4,500 recipients of the allowance at a total cost of 12 million. And as I've said, the Government is considering the report of the Ombudsman, and we have to take further legal advice on the report and on the recommendations.
Thank you.
Particularly with regard to the Equal Status Act.
Deputy MacDonald. Deputy MacDonald.
You deliberately ran down the clock there. On the mobility...
Sorry, we're supposed to... listen, we can't have a comprehensive questions all over the place. This is a question to the...
That's right.
A question. So let's be reasonable here, and we'll do the best we can. So
sorry,
if you please proceed, Deputy. Thank you.
Ceann Comhairle, I've asked what are reasonable questions.
Questions,
in
yes.
In respect of the mobility allowance, in 2008, the state acknowledged that they were acting outside the law in respect of the upper age limit. So can you just tell us if you propose to rectify that situation? There's no question mark over that. The state is acting outside of the law and needs to bring this scheme within the law. And can you please answer my question in respect of that meeting between Dr. Riley and NAMA in April?
That's a separate issue altogether.
Did you speak to Dr. Riley on this matter? Did he tell you that he had met NAMA? Did he tell you that they had discussed primary healthcare centres and the locations for them? Did he tell you that Balbriggan was part and parcel of that discussion?
Thank you.
Did that not raise, if you knew all of that, did that not raise an alarm bell in your mind? I think you stood up here and gave a very, very long, elaborate answer in respect of one issue that I raised with you, but you're clearly, to my mind, dodging the issue of NAMA and Dr. Riley. So please, Tánaiste, did you know that meeting took place? If you didn't know, are you going to raise it with him now?
Just before you reply, I just want to make it clear that in future, I don't like interrupting people when they're asking questions, but you cannot bring in 3 or 4 topics into questions. We allow a question to the Taoiseach or to the Tánaiste. So please respect that. And as I said, I don't like interrupting people, but Tánaiste, thank you.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. I mean, I'm willing to answer any questions that are raised here, but my understanding is that on Leader's question, where questions are asked without notice, that the rule of the House is that the representative of each party can ask one question. Now, I'm quite happy if the rules are changed to, if you want to answer ask 4 or 5 questions, to answer 4 or 5 questions. I've no problem. I've no problem with that. But if I try and give you a comprehensive answer, and you asked about the Children's Hospital and you asked about the mobility allowance, I'm quite happy if I give you a comprehensive answer on those questions. You then come along and say, well, you didn't answer the other question. And it's a parliamentary trick, and yeah, well, that's fair enough. But I recognise what it is, and I call it for it. In relation to your question about the mobility allowance, as I've said, we have the report from the Ombudsman. I've said to you that it is under consideration by government. We have to get legal advice on how to proceed, because obviously the issue that is in the report and the recommendation that is in the report is about complying with the terms of the Equal Status Act. We are getting the legal advice, and the report, the second report which has been issued by the Ombudsman, which was issued yesterday, will be considered by the government. In relation to ministers, individual ministers, and who they meet and what's in their diary and when, to be honest, I can't track, nor do I want to track, the diaries of every minister in this government and who they met and when they met them and so on.
Thank you.
Nor indeed could I possibly do so.
Thank you. Deputy Pringle, thank you. Deputy Pringle. Deputy Pringle, please. Deputy Pringle. Deputy Deputy Doherty, would you please give way to Deputy Pringle when he's called? Thank you. Deputy Pringle, without interruption.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Tánaiste, mental illness and suicide are a major problem in our society. There are 3 times more deaths by suicide than on our roads in this country. This week, Turn the Tide on Suicide launched a campaign for the establishment of a suicide prevention authority. I think it is time that this proposal was given very serious consideration. Up to 700 people every year take their lives by suicide. Over 300,000 people suffer from mental illness, and 75,000 people self-harm in this country every year. Surely this represents a crisis of national proportions. The National Suicide Prevention Office is clearly limited and underfunded. As part of the HSE, they are not independent and cannot be the advocate for vulnerable people. The programme for government made a commitment to ring-fence €35 million annually for mental illness. The question has to be asked, where has this funding gone? Are services been expanded, or has the money gone to close gaps in the health budget? We have seen the success in recent years of the Road Safety Authority and how road deaths have been reduced. Despite the terrible tragedies in recent days, impact has been made. A suicide prevention authority could achieve similar results. What it needs is the commitment of government to have it established and ensure that there is an adequate budget to make an authority work. Will your government give that commitment and start the process of closure for the thousands of families and loved ones that suffer from this loss across the country? Will your government make that commitment that could, through time, see the numbers of people who are at risk getting help and the toll that suicide takes in our society being reduced?
Thank you, Deputy.
I want to thank Deputy Pringle for the question, and I want to say first of all that I agree with you, Deputy, about the huge tragedy which suicide presents for families, for the loved ones, for the friends of those who commit suicide. And I also agree with you that the level of suicide in Ireland is very disturbing. And it is something that Deputy Dan Neville, in particular, has been highlighting for quite some time. And it is something that Minister Kathleen Lynch is particularly concerned about. And one of the reasons, indeed, why the government decided to allocate a specific budget of €35 million for the area of mental health was to address, in that context, the issue of suicide. I think it is fair to say that this is an issue that it isn't so much a case of putting in place an authority or an office. This is a problem that isn't resolvable simply by putting in place a state office or a state body to deal with it. What we have to do through the health services, but I think more widely in society, is to address the causes of suicide, to ensure that there are interventions at a personal level, people who are at risk, and sometimes it isn't very obvious or it isn't very clear who is at risk of suicide. We all come across cases of people who commit suicide, and you think they would be the last person in the world to do so, because very often people don't know what is going on or what is troubling somebody in their own personal, business, family life, or whatever. But it is an issue that is a priority issue for Minister Lynch, and I'm sure that she would be very happy to discuss in detail with you the measures that she is taking to address it.
Thank you. Deputy Pringle.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Tánaiste for his answer, but it is other countries across Europe have established national offices to tackle suicide and suicide prevention. With success, they have reduced the numbers. And I think it's vitally important that we look at this seriously in this country and look at establishing a suicide prevention authority. Because clearly the €35 million hasn't been spent on mental illness and hasn't been ring-fenced. And I'd like to ask you, Tánaiste, to outline clearly where that money has gone this year. And how can we have faith that next year, by giving this money to the HSE, that it will be used for the purposes intended? That's why I think it's vitally important that we have a suicide prevention authority that has control of its own budget and can work determinedly on this issue. And you have, as you say, a junior minister from your own party who's responsible for this. So I think it's time that we clearly outline where the money went this year and make sure that it is going in the right direction next year. Because are we going to be here next year again and see that it's been used to close the gap again in the HSE?
Thank you.
Well, I will ask Minister Lynch to brief you directly, Deputy, in relation to the measures that she is taking and that she has in hand to address the issue of suicide, and indeed also to address the way in which the budget for mental health is being spent. I think the important thing here is that the measures that we take to deal with suicide, and again coming back and agreeing with you that it is at an alarmingly high level in this country, that the measures that we take to address suicide are effective. And whether that is through the establishment of a dedicated separate office or authority for dealing with suicide, or whether it is through some other method, the important issue and the important thing is that whatever measures are taken are effective. And I'll ask Minister Lynch to provide you with a briefing on the actions that she has in hand to address it.
Thank you. That completes